Las Vegas, November 3rd, 1965. The neon lights of the Sands Hotel blazed like an unending dream. In the Copa room, the air was thick with bourbon, cigarettes, and expensive cologne. Dean Martin, a.k.a. Dino, had just finished his first performance of the night. His smooth voice echoed through "Everybody Loves Somebody," eliciting thunderous applause from the audience. Dean stepped off the stage, a familiar half-smile on his lips. He wore a perfectly tailored black suit, his tie slightly loosened, the king of cool style that made women turn heads and men envious. Beside him were Frank Sinatra, Sammy Davis Jr., and several other friends from the Rat Pack. They were the kings of Las Vegas, but behind the glamour lay complex relationships with the big bosses. Tonight, in the VIP area, a particularly dangerous figure was present. Victor the Viper Rossi, the Chicago Mafia boss, who controlled a portion of the Sands Hotel. Rossi was tall, scarred, and had eyes as cold as a snake. He had come to Vegas to inspect investments and didn't hesitate to assert his power. Dean sat down at a table with his wife Jean and a few friends. He ordered a scotch, lit a cigarette, and chatted cheerfully. But the atmosphere around the table suddenly changed when a young waiter named Tommy, a 22-year-old from Arizona, who had just started working there to support his sick mother, accidentally spilled some wine on Rossi's sleeve. "Idiot!" Rossi roared. Without warning, his large hand swung out, slapping Tommy hard across the face. The slap echoed through the quiet VIP area. Tommy fell backward, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth, his tray dropping to the floor. The entire room fell silent. Frank Sinatra frowned. Sammy clenched his fists. But no one dared speak. The Mafia controlled everything here. One wrong word could send you disappearing into the Nevada desert. Dean Martin was standing with his back to them, but he clearly heard the slap. He slowly turned around, his eyes narrowing in the dim light. The smile remained on his lips. But his gaze had changed, colder, sharper than ever. Flashback to Dean's journey. Born Dino Paul Crocetti into a poor Italian family in Steubenville, Ohio, Dean grew up amidst street fights and dreams of singing. He knew the Mafia well, the people who had helped him get his start in Chicago clubs. But Dean always kept his distance. He sang for fun, for family, not for power. In his memory, Dean recalled the time he refused to sing for a Chicago boss. "I sing for everyone, not just one person," he once said. Now, at Sands, that past came flooding back. Tommy stood up, trembling, and apologized. "I'm sorry, sir, I'll clean it up." Rossi sneered. "You think an apology is enough? I could buy this whole hotel and fire you with a phone call." Dean stood up. He was tall, his demeanor relaxed but exuding authority. The room held its breath. Frank whispered, "Dino, don't. Rossi isn't to be trifled with." But Dean stepped forward, placing his hand on Tommy's shoulder. "Are you all right, son?" Tommy, surprised, nodded. Dean turned to Rossi, his voice slow and slightly Italian accented. "Victor, buddy, we're here to have fun tonight, aren't we? This boy is just a waiter. Don't spoil the atmosphere." Rossi laughed loudly. "Martin, who do you think you are? I slapped a waiter. What business is it of yours? Sit down, singer." Dean didn't sit down. He looked straight into Rossi's eyes, a move few dared make. "I've sung here hundreds of nights. I know exactly who these Sands belong to. But I also know one thing. A real man doesn't need to beat up the weaker party to prove his strength." The room buzzed. Jean pulled her husband's arm, worried. Sammy Davis Jr. stood beside her, ready to support his friend. Rossi's face flushed, his hand gripping his glass. "You dare lecture me? I can make you and the entire Rat Pack disappear." Dean smiled, but it wasn't the kind of cheerful smile you'd have on stage. He pulled a wad of cash from his vest pocket. About $5,000. A large sum at the time. "This is compensation for your shirt, Victor, and a bonus for Tommy for his hard work. He won't be fired. In fact, I'll hire him as my personal assistant." Tommy's jaw dropped. The audience murmured. Rossi was stunned. No one had ever dared to openly challenge him like that without using a gun. Dean continued, his voice low and warm. "I grew up in an Italian family, Victor. We all know the street law. But the street law also teaches that protecting the weak is true strength. You slapped this kid for a wine stain? I've spilled an entire bottle of wine on stage, and the audience still loves me." Laughter erupted from several tables. Frank Sinatra clapped. Sammy laughed loudly. The atmosphere began to change. Rossi hesitated. He knew Dean had extensive connections, and publicly attacking Dean Martin would cause major trouble with the other bosses. Finally, Rossi forced a smile. "You're lucky because I like your singing, Martin." He took the money and left, his eyes filled with hatred. Las Vegas, in the days following the incident, was like a boiling pressure cooker. Rumors spread faster than cigarette smoke in the casinos. Dean Martin challenged Victor Rossi right in the middle of the Copa room. The Chicago mob boss was humiliated by a singer. Dean Martin sat in his private suite at the Sands Hotel, a glass of scotch in his hand, his eyes fixed on the brightly lit strip. His wife, Jeanne, sat beside him, her hand stroking his shoulder anxiously. "Dino, I know you're brave, but Rossi isn't the forgiving type," Jean whispered, her voice tinged with a gentle French accent. She was a strong woman who had been by Dean's side through the ups and downs of his career and family life. Dean smiled, his characteristic half-smile. "Honey, if I didn't do something, I wouldn't be Dino anymore. Tommy is just a kid from the Arizona desert. His mother is in the hospital. I can't just sit here and watch him get beaten like a dog." Meanwhile, Tommy sat in the staff locker room, his face still swollen. He wiped the dried blood from his lips, his hands trembling. A colleague whispered, "You're lucky. Dean Martin is defending you. But Rossi, he won't forget." The next morning, Dean called Tommy up to the suite. The boy entered hesitantly, his eyes fixed on the expensive suit and the signed photographs hanging on the wall. The Rat Pack, Frank, Sammy, Joey Bishop, were also there. The atmosphere was warm, like a family gathering. Sit down, son," Dean said, his voice deep and warm, with a slight Italian accent from his teenage years in Steubenville. He poured Tommy a glass of orange juice. "I heard you wanted to sing. Tell me about your mother." Tommy hesitated before telling him. His mother had cancer, and the hospital bills were exorbitant. He had dropped out of school, driving from Tucson to Vegas just to send money home. "I didn't want to bother you, Mr. Martin. It's just, last night you saved my job." Frank Sinatra laughed loudly, patting Dean on the shoulder. "My Dino is always like that. Cool on the outside, but a fiery heart. Remember that time in Chicago, Dean? You refused to sing for the boss because you didn't like the way he treated female singers." Sammy Davis Jr. performed an impromptu dance, making everyone laugh. "Tommy, you're talented. Tomorrow I'll teach you some dance moves, and Dean will teach you singing. Rat Pack doesn't abandon its friends." Dean pulled a thick envelope from his pocket. "This is the advance. You'll be my assistant on this tour. No more serving trays, and I'll take care of your mother's hospital bills. No arguing." Tommy burst into tears, kneeling down. "Mr. Martin, I don't know what to say. I'll be grateful to you for the rest of my life." Dean pulled him up, putting his arm around his shoulder. "Don't kneel. We're both Italian or something. Family comes first." In the following days, Dean introduced Tommy to the glamorous but dangerous world. They went for breakfast at a small roadside diner where Dean liked to sit in a secluded corner. He told Tommy about his impoverished childhood, his nights singing in small clubs, and how he met Jerry Lewis, an old friend he'd parted ways with in tears in 1956. "My life has had its highs and lows," Dean said, his eyes distant. "But I've learned that beating the weak isn't strength. Strength is getting them back up." Meanwhile, Victor Rossi wasn't sitting still. In a dimly lit office behind the casino, he met with a few henchmen. "Who does Martin think he is? I want him to feel the pain. Send a message, put pressure on Sands, cut his performance contract if necessary." But Dean had his own network. He called old friends from Chicago, who still remembered his voice. "Victor, he's playing big, but Vegas belongs to the Rat Pack. I won't let young Tommy be in danger." That night during the performance, Dean sang Volare with extraordinary energy. The audience cheered. Rossi sat at the VIP table, his face grim. As Dean stepped off the stage, Sands's boss whispered, "Dean, Rossi is putting pressure on you. Your contract." Dean chuckled. "Leave it to me. I'll buy him a drink tonight." 2 weeks after the slap, the atmosphere in Vegas was tense. The MDA Telethon charity event, an event associated with Jerry Lewis, was taking place in a large studio. Dean Martin showed up. Despite his busy schedule, he knew Jerry would be there, his old friend, though distant, still a brother in his heart. Tommy, now in a new suit, stood backstage supporting Dean. He whispered, "Mr. Martin, Rossi is here again. He's drunk." Dean nodded and stepped onto the stage under the lights. His voice, singing "Everybody Loves Somebody," resonated, moving the audience. Midway through the song, Rossi rose from the VIP table, pointing and shouting, "Martin, you think you're a hero? I'll make you regret interfering in my business." The entire auditorium fell silent. The cameras panned live. Dean stopped singing, put down the microphone, and walked straight down the stage towards Rossi. No one dared breathe. "Victor," Dean said slowly, his voice deep but powerful, "you still haven't learned your lesson. That night you slapped a kid for a drunken stupor. Now you want to slap the whole city. Look around, this is Vegas. People come to forget their pain, not to create more." Rossi's face flushed, his hands clenched. "You dare?" "In front of everyone?" Dean smiled, placing his hand on Rossi's shoulder, an unexpected gesture. "We're both Italian, Victor. I remember my mother singing old songs in Steubenville. Your mother probably did too. Don't let anger ruin everything." He pulled Rossi onto the stage. The audience held their breath. Dean sang an old Italian folk song, "That's Amore," his voice blending with Rossi's. Rossi was initially stiff, but gradually, tears streamed down his face. The image of the Mafia boss crying on stage was broadcast live, a moment that shocked everyone. Jerry Lewis ran from backstage and hugged Dean. Two old friends, after 11 years apart, stood together on the same stage. "Dino, you're still as crazy as ever," Jerry whispered, his voice choked with emotion. Dean chuckled. "And you're still the most tearful clown in Hollywood." The atmosphere turned emotional. Dean introduced Tommy onto the stage. He sang a short piece with a shaky but sincere voice. The audience applauded loudly. Rossi, after that performance, quietly left. He called his henchmen. "Enough, Martin. He's not the enemy." After the performance, Dean sat with Jan and the children in the hotel room. His son asked, "Dad, aren't you afraid?" Dean hugged his son. "I am, but if I don't do the right thing, the fear will only grow." After the telethon, Dean decided to take a short break in Tucson, Arizona, where he loved the peaceful desert. Tommy accompanied him. driving Dean's old Cadillac along Route 66. The red landscape and distant mountain ranges brought back childhood memories. Along the way, Dean turned on the radio and sang along to "Memories Are Made of This." He told Tommy about Jerry Lewis. "We were the perfect couple, 1946 in Atlantic City, laughing nonstop. Then fame, jealousy, a breakup in 1956. It hurt me, but life has to go on." Tommy asked, "Do you regret confronting Rossi?" Dean looked out at the desert. "I regret not doing it sooner. I grew up with the Mafia around me, but I chose singing over guns. Kindness sometimes comes at a price, but it's worth it." In Tucson, Dean met up with a group of old friends, told jokes, and played cards. But late at night he sat alone, thinking about the pressure. The Mafia rumors still lingered. An anonymous letter threatened the family. Dean called Frank. "If anything happens to Jean and the kids, I won't forgive you." Frank laughed over the phone. "Dino, you have the Rat Pack. We'll take care of you." The days in the desert helped Dean recharge. He wrote to his mother in Ohio, sent money, and promised to visit. Tommy began practicing singing seriously, with Dean as his teacher. "Don't sing loudly, son. Sing from the heart." One evening, they sat around a campfire. Dean sang, "Ain't That a Kick in the Head?" the guitar echoing. Tommy sang along, his voice growing stronger. In that moment, their friendship deepened. When Rossi returned to Vegas, he sent a gift, a bottle of fine Italian wine, and a message. "Martin, you're a real man. No more hatred." Dean laughed, sharing with Tommy. "See, sometimes a slap can change a person." The chapter concludes with Dean standing on the Sands rooftop, gazing at the neon lights. He whispers, "Life is a ballad. There are happy times and sad times, but you have to sing it to the end." After his trip to Tucson, Dean Martin returned to Las Vegas in a refreshed spirit, but the shadow of Victor Rossi hadn't completely dissipated. Even though the Mafia boss had sent a message of peace, some of his henchmen still wanted to teach the singer a lesson. Dean sensed this through strange midnight phone calls and the appearance of suspicious figures around the Sands Hotel. In the spacious suite, Dean sat with Jean and their children, Dean Paul, Ricci, Gina, and Diana. The soft light from the window overlooking the Strip created a warm atmosphere, a stark contrast to the noisy casino world outside. Jean was reading to her youngest daughter, while Dean Paul asked his father about the incident with Rossi. "Dad, I heard people say you made him cry on stage. Aren't you afraid of retaliation?" The 12-year-old's eyes widened, his voice full of admiration. Dean set down his glass of scotch and pulled his son onto his lap. His voice was deep and warm, tinged with weariness but full of love. "Son, everyone's afraid. I grew up in Steubenville, where the Mafia controlled every corner. I've seen friends disappear because of a wrong word. But if I had remained silent in the face of that slap, I wouldn't have been able to look you in the eye again. Kindness isn't weakness. It's the strongest weapon I have." Jean smiled, holding her husband's hand. "Dino, you're always like that. Remember that time you refused to sing for a Chicago boss just because he treated female singers badly? You lost a big contract, but you still sing better than ever." She told her children about the difficult years when Dean and Jerry Lewis were the golden couple, wandering through small clubs before becoming famous. Tommy, now a close assistant, walked in carrying a tray of snacks. He was wearing a new suit, his hair neatly combed, looking much more mature than the trembling waiter he once was. "Mr. Martin, I just spoke with the hospital. My mother is much better thanks to your financial support. She wants to thank you in person." Dean laughed heartily, pulling Tommy to sit at the table. "That's good, son. Bring your mother up here sometime. Vegas is glittering, but it's also lonely. Family is what keeps us grounded. That evening, the Rat Pack gathered in a private room. Frank Sinatra held a martini, telling satirical Hollywood jokes. "Dino, you shocked the whole country with your duet with Rossi. I thought that guy would pull out a gun, not shed tears." Sammy Davis Jr. did a quick tap. Joey Bishop added a few humorous lines. The atmosphere was cheerful, but Dean noticed Sammy was worried about his friend. Dean, Rossi may be pretending to be peaceful, but his gang is still lurking around. I heard they're planning to cause trouble at an upcoming show," Sammy whispered as the two went out onto the balcony to smoke. Dean gazed at the shimmering neon lights. "I know, Sammy, but I don't want to use violence. We're artists, not gangsters. I'll use my voice and influence to resolve this. Tomorrow I'll see the Sands boss and ask for increased security for Tommy and his family." In the following days, Dean devoted himself to his family and Tommy. He taught him to sing, "Memories are made of this," correcting every note and every pronunciation. Tommy progressed rapidly, his voice brimming with emotion from real-life experiences. Dean even arranged a small performance for him at the Sands Lounge, where the audience applauded enthusiastically. But a storm was brewing. One night, as Dean was driving Jean back to the hotel in his Cadillac after a performance, two strange cars chased after them. They closed in, trying to block their way. Dean gripped the steering wheel tightly, his voice calm. "Jean, hold on tight. Don't be afraid." He sped up, using his familiarity with Vegas to escape. Back at Sands, Dean immediately called Frank and other old contacts. "Enough. I'm going to see Rossi one last time." The fateful encounter took place at a small diner along Route 66, about an hour's drive from Las Vegas, a place Dean often visited when he wanted to escape the glitz and glamour. Victor Rossi arrived alone, without limbs, his face grim, but his eyes different. He sat opposite Dean, 2 cups of black coffee and a sandwich in front of him. "Martin, you won," Rossi said, his voice hoarse. "After the telethon, my son in Chicago called. He watched the live performance and said, 'Dad, why are you crying? I've never cried in front of my children. You reminded me of my mother, of the hard times in Sicily before I came to America." Dean nodded, his eyes fixed on the mob boss. "Victor, we both came from the streets. I sang to forget poverty, you used power to control. But the slap to Tommy reminded me that if we don't stop, we'll lose everything. I don't want hatred. I just want Vegas to be a place where people can sing and laugh." Rossi was silent for a long moment, then pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket. "This is the paperwork transferring a portion of the Sands stake to you and Tommy. No more pressure, and I'm sorry to that kid. If you allow it, I want to sponsor his mother's medical expenses for life." Dean smiled genuinely, for the first time not his usual stage smile. The two men, the singer and the mogul, shook hands. In that moment, their Italian pasts seemed to merge. Folk songs, family dinners, and lessons in compassion. Back in Vegas, Dean hosted a small party at the Copa room. Tommy opened with "That's Amore," his voice full of emotion. The Rat Pack took the stage in full. Frank, Sammy, Joey, and Dean. They sang familiar hits together, and the audience cheered. Jerry Lewis unexpectedly appeared from the audience, running up to hug Dean, a true reunion after so many years apart. "Dino, you're still the craziest friend," Jerry said, tears welling up in his eyes. "But I'm proud of you." Dean hugged his friend, his voice choked with emotion. "Jerry, without you I wouldn't be the Dino I am today. We parted ways because of fame, but kindness brought us back together." The performance ended with the ballad, "Everybody Loves Somebody." Dean sang solo, his gaze fixed on Jean and their children seated in the front row. Tommy stood beside him, his mother having been brought from the hospital. Victor Rossi sat quietly at the VIP table, applauding softly. Dean concluded his inner story as he stood on the Sands rooftop at midnight. The Nevada desert was peaceful under the stars. He whispered, "Life is a long ballad. There are happy times, sad times, dangerous times. But as long as we sing from the heart, people will remember it forever."